There we go.
Steve, welcome to Start a Grind.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here again with you.
And you didn't have far to travel. Henley is...
Well, I've lived in Henley-on-Thames for the last 25 years, but before that I've moved around quite a bit. I have a charity in Reading, so I sort of feel that pretty well at home here.
Perfect. Okay, so I guess one of the obvious places to start is kind of going back to almost the beginning for you. And one of the things that for me has been incredible for your journey is how you very much depicted almost kind of resilience in your journey that you've gone through. So let's start off when you're 5 years old and talk us through that.
Well, I arrived in this country as a 5-year-old unaccompanied refugee. I was with my older sister, so I was clutching her hand. But it's a very significant start, and if you look what happens to immigrants, quite a few of us do actually move into the entrepreneurial area because we meet discrimination, perhaps because we see something from our old country that would transfer well into our new country, or just from the sheer stubbornness and resilience that tends to go with, if you survive, having survived those dreadful times in 1939, life can't throw much at me that throws me anymore. And that I have found quite helpful. The sheer impact of being, I was very lucky. The Quakers organized trains out of Vienna, and so I was really shipped to a new country, a new nationality, new language, new parents. I was very lucky with my foster parents as well, but nevertheless, everything was changed. And that has given me, I think, the ability to cope with change. And eventually, I actually like change. I like to do new things. I like to make new things happen. So in a way, that refugee start is terribly, terribly important to the woman that I've become.
Awesome. Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Let's start in the early stages. I mean, you have, by your own admission, no formal education. Yeah. And it's something that I guess you even mentioned, but you mentioned recently, is that it's something that you obviously regret. However, do you think entrepreneurs are born, or they can be nurtured, and the educational...
Oh, that nature-nurture debate has gone on forever, ever, hasn't it? I would have liked, I think, to have gone to university. I did get qualified. I studied at evening classes for 6 years to get an honours degree in mathematics. I'm a lapsed mathematician now. But the sheer trauma of struggling to get going from such a poor start really made me very independent. It made me very resilient. It also made me very disruptive. And the first time somebody called me disruptive, I thought they were being rude. But I realized that is what I am. Because I haven't been educated, because nobody had told me what one was supposed to do in business, I just went ahead and did it. And so I was breaking a whole lot of new ground simply because I didn't know what other people had done. I was also motivated in my business by a sort of crusade for women. I'm delighted to see so many women entrepreneurs here. In my generation, we were really battling for the right to do certain jobs, the right for equal pay. You really have to look back 50 years to see we were opening the doors for the world that I think you can now enjoy. But what was the question?
It was essentially all about no formal education, yeah, and how that shaped you. But let's touch on how you got into technology, right? Because at the time you're talking late 50s, early 60s, and your first kind of foray into technology, not as maybe some of us know it, but more in terms of the punch cards and the very paper.
I can
and
hear
pencil
the
way
sneer in your voice as you say,
programming.
punch cards. We did a lot with punch cards.
Yeah, but let's talk about obviously your logical brain and how you got into technology. How did you discover this thing called computers and get into that industry?
I always knew I wanted to do mathematics and I wanted to solve very wonderful theorems, Fermat's last theorem. It took 40 years for somebody else to do that. But then I began to realize that I didn't have the sort of mind that could really contribute as a research mathematician. But luckily for me, computers came on the scene, and overnight, that's what I wanted to do. It was like falling in love again. You know, I was so desperately, passionately wanting to do software. I could not believe that I should be paid so well for doing something that I enjoyed so much. And so I got into computers really by chance, and very early. The British Computer Society was just starting. My employer, who was the Post Office Research, didn't have a computer. We had to go elsewhere. A friend that I was at evening classes with said he'd got a computer, and if I came along, I could have a look at it, you know, this sort of thing. So I was rubbernecking for him and making myself useful. The sort of jobs that I had to do was sort of sweeping up the chads from the floor. The chads are these little bits of paper that come out of the punch card, the bit that's been punched. One or two people remember them, yes. So it was almost by chance, and it's worked wonderfully for me because I'm never bored in computing. It's always moving, it's always different. But at the same time, I was one of the first to look at computing for its social and economic impact, not just as a technologist. And so I have been able to contribute, and my company was based on that idea that this is something for society. It was a company of women, a company for women, designed for women, flexible working to the extreme, driven by women, conceived by women. It was a very different sort of company, and eventually, long years afterwards, it became a success.
Okay, so let's go through that particular journey of the ideation, right? Because a lot of people turn around and say, how do you come up with an entrepreneurial idea to essentially launch a business? And for you, I guess, it was a case where you saw a gap in the market, and going back to when you were described as being disruptive, your idea for the venture was somewhat disruptive at the time.
It was a crusade for women, yes. You laugh, but it was.
Talk to us then about those early days of freelance programs.
Well, freelance programmers started on my dining room table in a little cottage in Buckinghamshire, where there happened to be a post box in the wall of the cottage. And so I could mail. I mean, how did one write software in those days? I'm talking about over 50 years ago. You would draw with paper and pencil flow charts, sort of defining the task to be done, and that would take you weeks or months. And then you would convert that into code, usually machine code, occasionally in binary. And then that would be posted by the mail service to a data center who would punch it onto cards or paper tape. And then that would be repunched in order to verify that process at least. All this before it ever got near the computer. And the computer, I used to get terrible stomach aches when I was going on it because it was so expensive. And you'd actually hire the computer by the minute. And as a junior person, and I did start very junior, that was, you know, I really was not allowed to spend too much on the computing. So it was very stressful, very enjoyable. Not entirely young people, because some of the golden oldies also came out and decided that this is something that they wanted to be part of. But I was very lucky in my timing. I think if I'd have been 10 years older, Finn, I would never have made it.
So you've come up with an idea, you know, you've launched it, very limited capital. You signed a few clients. What were some of the early challenges you faced winning that new business, and how did you overcome?
That sounds nice. I think that I needed to get in front of potential customers, and in a very naive way, because I didn't know anything at all about business, I wrote letters to them, when, especially the customers who were advertising for programming staff. And the letter effectively said, I'm not applying for the job, but I could do your programming for you in my company. And I was launching these out through that little post box in the wall, probably about by the dozen anyway, and getting absolutely no response whatsoever. And my dear husband suggested that I use the family nickname. Instead of writing Stephanie Shirley, that double feminine, I used the family nickname, and after I wrote as Steve Shirley. And suddenly, lo and behold, people began to reply to my letters, and I got the odd meeting, and they were a bit surprised when I walked through the door. But in that way, the business took off. So I had to sort of actually break through a sexist barrier, and it can be done. And
but also kind of, I guess, it showed how you thought outside the box in some of these things, in terms of you saw a challenge, and in your entrepreneurial thinking, figured a way around it.
I mean, I'm always fascinated by innovation, because, you know, do we really know where innovation comes from? I don't think I know where mine comes from, except from the culture of my childhood. I know how to stimulate innovation if I get stale, which has happened. And I travel to a new country when I went to Moscow, for example, you know, not only is the whole culture very, very different, you go use the shops differently, you can't even, their underground system is absolutely marvelous with silver chandeliers, you know, quite amazing. But you come back and you're buzzing with ideas, not about Russia, not about chandeliers, but suddenly you're more creative. So I use travel to stimulate me. I very often, I mean, it's one thing if you go to bed, you're worried about something, what shall I do in this situation, you know, and then you might wake up in the morning with some ideas as to how to start.
Yeah.
But for me, I can go to bed perfectly happy about a particular project that I'm on, and somehow dream about it. So I wake up in the morning and say, I've got that wrong. I've got to go back and redo that. And I don't know what makes that happen. Does anybody else know where that creativity, where the innovation comes from? Yes, Prabhu.
One of the books I read last was Where Great Idea Comes From. And according to the author, it was the meeting of minds, especially when, like you said, those minds come from different countries, because they perceive the world in different ways. When they talk about the same thing, but from their perspective, then something new comes out of the conversation.
I think this is why corporates are beginning to be interested in diversity. Diversity by gender, diversity by race, color, religion, sexual orientation, and now age. Yes, I'm going on working. I'm not going to retire.
You were innovative in a number of other things as well as the business scale. One of those was stock options, right, which is something that's become sort of very prevalent now. So a lot of your early employers were also kind of part owners within the business. What inspired that?
Necessity, I suppose, did some of it.
Okay.
Shares are one way of getting super quality people that I could not afford to employ. Offer them a small shareholding, and some of them will come. But more, it was again a dream of co-ownership. I wanted the staff to own the company that I had created. I wanted the staff to share the risks and equally share the treasures. And so it was not just stock options, but it was actually I gave away 25% of the company to the staff. And I'm enormously proud of that. It was actually very difficult to do because if you give something away, the Inland Revenue want a slice of it. And if all you've got is a company and the bits of paper that go with it, it's quite hard to do. It took me 11 years to do that. Most things in business do take a long time. But I'm so glad I did, and it has that collegiate culture today. It's no longer female-oriented. It was taken over in 2007, and by that time it was about 60-40. It was 60% female, 40% male, and that reflects its history.
Yeah, brilliant. And professional management. A lot of early startup companies are always advised when you scale to a certain stage, you have to know when to let go of your baby, right? And when to bring in the professional managers, as it were. Did you ever reach a stage, and if so, what brought it on, and how did you best manage it?
I love doing new things, so the day-to-day management of the company, and nothing runs itself. I mean, you know, you do need administration, you do need processes, you can't bumble along in dashing around in all directions. And I found that I needed to, I'm sorry, I've lost the train. What was I talking about?
Well, we were essentially talking what drove you to then bring in the new management and how you were happy to
I got stuck with all the admin. That, you know, I went into this business because I love software and computing, and within 18 months, 2 years or something, I was paying other people to write the software, and I was getting landed with the insurance and the tax and the HR. I mean, I knew which child had babies, which child had measles, which it really was quite and I got, I mean, I could feel the load of this company sort of actually driving me down. Endless problems, one after the other, people problems. I had a breakaway group very early on, and I wanted to get rid of all that. So I did deliberately set out to get professional managers in who would enjoy doing that corporate stuff, who would be more financially oriented than I am, because I'm not terribly interested in money. And that made quite a difference, really, to me and to the rest of the company. The first person who took over from me did very well, but she became ill. And in fact...
Was it?
No, she was marvellous. Well, she was... but the first one was Suzette Harold, and she died. And so I tried again, and again it was an in-house appointment, because I feel if I haven't got candidates coming up, I haven't trained them properly. With Alison Newell, who was, in her own way, absolutely wonderful. But she ran it very much as I would have done. She was just more competent and could do it better. But she was still running it as a one-man, sort of spider running everything in a very entrepreneurial way. And that time I wanted to make it systematized. I wanted it to get stable. I wanted to get it a structure. And eventually she and I, it wasn't that we argued, but I wanted her to do things that she really didn't want to grow it that sort of way. So the third time I was recruiting, and I went to headhunters, and I got the wonderful Hilary Cropper, who sadly also died, but she gave us, 12 years service, and she took this embryonic company with its very strange culture of very feminine, very soft, very quality, and she just drove it up, and she just made marvels of it.
Let's move on to essentially the big exit. You know, we're comfortable, I guess, as it were.
Yes.
And philanthropy becomes an important part of your life. What drove that? I
think all philanthropy is sort of wanting to make the world a better place, and that is something to make it a fairer place.
There was no desire to ever go and retire on an island in the Caribbean or something along those lines. Your view is make the world a fairer place.
I think that's what does, and certainly did at that time, motivate me. Why should I start giving it away? I think it's just fair. Especially if you've been poor, you know what poverty is like. And in fact, poor people give much more as a pro rata of their earnings to charity, because we know what it's like to be poor. We know what it's like to be hungry, to faint from lack of food. So once you start realizing I don't need to worry about where I'm going to sleep tomorrow, I don't need to worry about where the next meal is coming from. I don't have to buy the cheapest thing, I can buy the thing that I choose. Then you start thinking, well, what can this money do for me? And it gives me choice. That's the thing it really does. You could develop the company, you could sail around the world, you could... And I decided really to share the goodies with the people that had helped me make it and others. In particular, my late son was autistic, and so I've put, 50 million into various autism projects. So it's something that I know about and I care about it, so that's where I put my money.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. I'd love to kind of then now shift slightly to what I like to call the world's view of entrepreneurs that have got the wisdom to share in how they see their site. So I always have this view, there's no right or wrong kind of answer to these things. It's more, what is the view that Dame Stephanie has or Steve has for some of these things? And I guess the first is your view how entrepreneurship is very much a buzzword now. It is something that we certainly advocate as much as possible. However, is there the risk that we're creating an environment where we need the right people within organizations? What's your view on that, in that people should solely focus on entrepreneurship, or should maybe consider actually going to work for some entrepreneurs?
I think it's a personal choice. Not quite sure, Finn. I think the government is encouraging entrepreneurs. I mean, we have a lot of small companies in this country, but they they don't stress how very difficult it is to get a company up and running and to get it sustainable so that it will run when you're on holiday or when you're sick or when you actually retire. Are you nodding away or are you doing something else? I mean, each of us decides themselves. I've been a corporate woman because my company eventually employed 8,500 people. Yeah. And by the time I was still running it, it got up to about 1,000, and it became very different. And the bigger and more successful it grew, the less I had to contribute and the less I enjoyed it. So I know I'm a starter of things. I've started 4 charities and got them sustainable. I've started several projects. That's what I like to do. On the other hand, I have a good friend who's a corporate lady, and she's thrilled to be climbing the corporate ladder in a quite different way, playing with very large sums of money, very successfully, just a different person. So I think this is a personal decision that each of you has to make.
And what are some of the ways that you mentioned having found before charities, how entrepreneurial thinking can be important in charities and philanthropy as a whole?
I think setting up a charity is exactly the same as setting up a business. It's just the numbers are viewed in a slightly different way, and the metrics of what is success and what isn't are slightly different. All charities and not-for-profits have to be business-like, otherwise they just don't survive. But the driving force, really, for an organization, that is people with our energy, with our skills, with our contacts, This is what drives an organization, whether it be for medical research for autism or whether it be to build business like Trump Tower. Trump is an example. I shouldn't really move on to that, but he's an he's an example of the sort of business person that I don't think is adding very much. And that's disappointing because he has a high profile. He can do quite a lot. But I think we'll move on to another topic.
Let's talk more about the responsibilities of leaders, right? So when you're an entrepreneur and you have a high profile, and perhaps you've done successfully well, right? So you have some money in the bank account. You obviously mentioned the responsibility to make society a better place. But for some people it could be that, whereas the view where they say, I have worked hard for 20, 30, 40, 50 years building my company up. Now I want to go retire in Necker Island or something like that. Not that I've got anything against Richard Branson, but where does that kind of line place as role model or entrepreneurial role model leaders in societies? Do they always have to do the right thing?
I think the morals of a business are very important, and once you start to make good decisions in small ways, then it becomes easier and easier to do the right thing, even when it's not in your short-term interest. The way in which business develops is so different for each of us, but it has some commonalities. It has financial control, so unless you can master that, it's not going to survive. It has to sell, and that means market its services. So unless you can master marketing, you're not going to survive. And you have to be good with people, because you can be terribly, terribly clever, and if you can't get people to work with you, or for you, or they will direct you, unless you can get people to do that, I think business is a pretty tough place. I certainly find it tough. It's much easier to succeed, incidentally, by the time you've got a bit of money. It's the first one that's so difficult. And when you start as a refugee with nothing, it does take you a long time to sort of just get up to subsistence level. But I think running a business is so exciting. It calls on all parts of your personality. It can be wonderfully successful in financial terms. I'm a scientist, so if something doesn't work, I just stop it and do something else. If it does work, I do more of it. It's very simple drivers of business. And the way in which organizations develop, they sort of a bit of a pyramid, and then you say, well, you need to get it flatter, and then it goes flatter, and then you start putting it into national bits and so on. I mean, there are fascinating things to be doing, fascinating from the point of view of intellectually. The people issues, I think, are paramount.
What drives you as an individual to get up every morning and keep going? You have an amazing speaking schedule.
I think it's still something to do with that childhood that I shared with you. I feel that I need to justify the fact that I was saved from Nazi Europe when 1.5 million children were killed. I still feel the need to justify my existence, and so each day has got to have something worthwhile in it. It might be good food, or it might be getting a new cell, but something worthwhile, not just frittering my time away. And that's what keeps me going. And I don't think that age... I get wiser in certain ways, but I also get slower and more forgetful, and all sorts of things happen. But I still feel that I have things to give, in particular to women. just showing that 50 years ago I was dealing with some of these issues. So come on, we ought to be able to do it.
Your memoirs were very inspirational. From a psychological point of view, was it therapeutic in sort of getting it all out? I mean, the title of the book, is Let It Go. Were they sort of a way to get it out of your system and let it go? Or was it just a case of, documenting from a legacy perspective?
A lot of people ask me whether it was therapeutic, and frankly it wasn't.
Right.
It was a dutiful thing, and I do a lot of things from duty. The title took me 18 months to write it, and I dictated, and my co-author knocked it into shape. The title has a pun about information technology, which I'm sure all of you have seen, Let It Go. But actually it comes from a Buddhist principle where you try to live your life not carrying the baggage of the past. And I was struggling with the baggage of my childhood. So you actually are able to leave things behind and move on and start a new friendship, and just let it go. And that's a principle which I haven't expressed very well, sorry, but I really try to practice in my life, that you don't keep on and on about something that went wrong yesterday.
Yeah.
You just
Got to
keep going.
I love that. Let's open it up for a few questions. Anyone that's got a burning question they would like to ask Dame Stephanie? Hey, maybe you even got to the Steve stage as well. Okay, go ahead.
I'm Autism did a documentary recently on BBC. Sorry, can you hear me? Anne Robinson did a documentary recently on BBC called The Problem with Women, when she came across quite strongly saying she felt the brave that she had to fight quite hard for what she achieved, and that women of kind of my generation, 20s and 30s, haven't really carried it on. Do you agree?
I haven't really heard the question.
So there was a documentary. When was the documentary that was going to say?
On BBC One.
BBC One, which was The Problem with Women.
Oh, yes.
And if I got this correct and correct wrong, that she had to fight a lot more because she was older.
Oh, we've
for what
always
she
said
achieved.
that.
But
We
those
have to
in the
work
20s
that
and
much
30s
harder.
haven't had to fight as much. Is that correct? Okay, so those in the 20s and 30s have had it easier.
I think that is true. That the world has got easier for women. It's got easier for blacks. It's got easier for various sexual orientation. We have become slightly more accepting of diversity. The gender issue is the one that economically makes most difference to the country. If we can get women working effectively, or as effectively as they could and should and want to, it would make an enormous difference to the GDP. Don't ask me to quote the figures. But everybody finds things difficult when you're young, when you're inexperienced, and that's half the joy of life, to be mastering those difficulties and saying that even among this lot of bigots, I can still do it.
Okay. Right. Anyone else? Got a question? Yeah, sure. Hey, Nikki, how are you?
I'm alright, thank you.
Good.
You say you have a love of starting things, and you seem to have had many ideas of many things to start. How did you, when you have many ideas at once, how did you go about picking what you would focus on?
I haven't explained about all the things in those many that were ghastly mistakes. But if you've got enough on the go, so that's a mistake, just drop it and move on, let it go. Yeah. So I've had pretty big failures. I started a company in Denmark, and 8 years later, it sort of ticked over a bit. 8 years later, I sold it for £1 or something just to get out of it and leave the staff. I started a company in the Netherlands and sold that eventually to a client. They started in the States twice, failed both times, but started something in India, and that took off big time. Half the company were working in India, but when it came to be sold. So you don't, you have to have a lot of things on the go so that you can cope with failures, and they're so unimportant compared to concentrating on building up the good, healthy business.
Sure.
So brilliant.
Where are you?
Brilliant.
So,
Can you hear?
yep, can.
Just a brilliant story. It was so inspiring to hear your story, first off. I'm blind and I'm a businesswoman, and I've always turned that to my advantage because you're pretty memorable in business when you have both those
Yes.
assets, if you like. Can you tell us a story of where you've found that it's been a benefit to be awarded in a minority situation?
Oh, well, that happens all the time if you're bidding for business. They remember this woman that came up. And, the more imbalanced the teams, the more memorable you become. And you just have to exploit that. I think also, I can't see you anymore, and there's no pun intended because you've got somebody in between us, but I think there is a drive and an energy that comes to the underdog. If you're going to survive, you're going to manage. I'm very sorry for your loss of sight, but other people have yet worse things, and you obviously lead a good, active, professional career.
Always been great for free PR as well, I've found.
Yes, I guess that's true.
You mentioned failure, and that comes up a lot all the time. I mean, truth be told, no one wants to fail, and no one likes to fail, right? So how can we better manage failure as entrepreneurs, or maybe even as individuals, right, through our lives?
But we have to accept failure, because if it were easy, we'd all be millionaires, wouldn't we? And the pleasure, the pleasure of it comes from climbing up. I did better than last year. I did better than I'd hoped. Oh dear, no, not this year. But anyway, next year, brush yourself down and carry on.
Yeah, you mentioned about business ethics, which was interesting. It kind of threw me a bit, really, because like you, I'm in business, and I'm self-taught. I'm not trained in it. But we do a lot of work with entrepreneurs, with multinationals, very high-level business people, CEOs and stuff. And yet, I've never had any training when I talk to people who've got MBAs. I never thought about this question until you mentioned it. I still don't know how to properly do business with people who've got MBAs. I've never done a course, but we get a lot of work. We're doing really well. I'm not sure what I want to ask you. Does it matter? Do you think it's worth trying to learn business ethics about people who study business? Does it make any difference? I honestly don't know.
I think you've probably learnt most of your business ethics by the time you're 25. Yeah.
We're just very honest, actually.
Yes. I mean, in my world, it was the norm to write progress reports to your client or customer. And you would have an internal report and you would have an external report. Now, I gather that's quite common, but in my naivety, we just had one report. So we told him, we're running late, this is what we're doing about it. We're running late, could you give us some more machine time, or whatever it might be. We built up a reputation for reliability and high quality the hard way. We bid once for a very major government contract, and we bid together with IBM. And a lot of work goes into those bids and so on. And the customers have said they liked our bid very much. They would like to work with us, blah, blah, blah. But would we partner with ICL, which was the national thing? And we said no. We have worked on this. We have got here with IBM. Our bid is with IBM, and let it stand. And of course, we didn't get the work. that's neither here nor there. However, IBM were quite impressed that we would behave so ethically, and they partnered with us for many a year. So, in fact, I was rewarded for that honesty. With the Department of Health, I blew the whistle once on something that was going wrong in a department. And the guy was fired, but I never got any more work from the Department of Health. So you really have to have some guts and be able to carry your team with you when you do something like that. Because they were saying, if you do that, we will lose those businesses.
Have that conviction and see. Alex, and then we'll do Alex, Steve. Go.
How software companies, when the software companies are much more emergent, how were they considered generally? Were they kind of looked past, or were they hired? Did people realise it was kind of the future, just generally speaking?
I think people thought I was mad because software was given away free with the hardware. But I mean, it soon began to be recognized as the most important thing, just as the most important things today must be artificial intelligence, virtual reality. What was the other thing you mentioned that I thought, yes, that's right. But, you know, there are certain things that stand a good chance of being very important in the future. There'll be other things that come up, I guess.
Steve?
Thank you for coming down tonight. What I really loved about your side of the story was the philanthropic side of it. As an entrepreneur, I've always had a burning drive and passion to better the world around me. And we started our business up with that end in mind, to say we want to transport the top 10% of wealth to the bottom 10%.
Now there's the strategic aim, isn't it?
Rather than getting stuck at the top and then just not going anywhere. Feed it back into the bottom and start using money as a perpetual flow of energy, right? And so that's our goal. But going back to Tim's question earlier about is that burning desire born, or can it be fostered?
What do you guys think?
Let's do an impromptu poll. People who think entrepreneurs are born, raise your hand.
I think I do. Yeah.
I think it's more, yeah, it's more from experience. I think to Dave Shirley's earlier point, your experience as a child really formed your character.
Yes.
And I think you need a nature that allows that informing, which then allows you then to build. I mean, I have a personal story. We all have personal stories. And if you dig deeper beyond the surface, you get to the character of the individual and their capability and their potential. And I think that's what you harness on. We talk about diversity, we talk about inequality, but it's the heart of that person that can drive them on their journey and their potential. And they can become entrepreneurs, or they can become leaders, or they can become whatever they dream to be. But having having a world that enables them and supports them in that, it's critical. And that's my passion, to help people become the best of who they are, wherever their journey is.
That's a lovely expression, the best of who you are. I mean, I feel I have done what was in me to do. And that's the same thing. I've done what was in me to do.
I love it. Okay. For those of you that have not yet got your copy, I'd encourage you to get it. I'm going to wrap this up with, and it so happens, you know, I mean, there were loads of, my book is like really highlighted a lot. So
Are you one of these people that scribbles in books?
I'm highlighting them a lot. I mean, you know, I highlight them, I mark them, because, you know, often it's a journey, right? So there's always points you want to get back. And it was quite nice, because having done well over 65 interviews, I say to CEOs, like, you know, this is quite nice, because this one I just had to like go through the book. But I had to be very careful as well, in that I don't want to give too much away in the book. I would genuinely, just to, you know, sometimes you need to read someone's story. One of the reasons I love Startup Grind is because it's the story, it's the journey. I mean, you mentioned it. Everyone, we all have our own personal journeys and stories, and sometimes to hear just the kind of resilience that someone has gone through is great. So I don't know what else life has in store for me,
I know we're going to have a film about the book.
Oh, love that. You heard it here first. But I believe more firmly than ever that I will get the most out of what remains to me by giving rather than receiving, and by having faith in human nature, in my own nature, and in the world itself. I came close to annihilation at the outset of my life, and deep down I remain a refugee. I know that nothing lasts forever. I know that tomorrow may well be quite different from today. All the more reason, then, to welcome the uncertainties of the future, and to see each unknown tomorrow as an opportunity, not a threat. We waste too much time being afraid when what we should really fear is wasting time.
It's not all as serious as that.
I had to, that was quite a serious bit, so I couldn't laugh. No, you all laughed at the end. Ladies and gentlemen,
Thank you very much.
So there are a few people that did buy a book. So we got another Liz. Liz is.